members. Welcome to the Planning Applications Committee meeting of Wednesday the 30th of January 2021. Tracy, can I have said and apologies please, and I am happy to approve the remote participation of members of the committee. Thank you.
Morning, Chairman. We've currently got 19 members present. I don't have any apologies. Not present at the start of the meeting are Councillor Giusti and Councillor Sloan.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Do we have any declarations of interest from members? I don't appear to have any. Thank you. We come to the minute of the previous meeting of the 16th of December 2020, and whilst we're dealing with that, David Sutty, if you're with us, can you give us an update on the proposed site visit for Teregos, given the recent announcement by the First Minister, please?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Yes, this was an application which you might recall just before Christmas the committee decided to go for a visit, and unfortunately as soon as we came back after Christmas we were in full lockdown. So my interpretation of the Scottish Government's guidance is that it would actually be illegal for us at the moment to undertake that site visit, and I've informed the applicant's agent accordingly. So unfortunately, unless and until things improve and the present lockdown restrictions are lifted, we will be unable to actually undertake that site visit. So that's obviously something to bear in mind today as well for any applications. If members are minded to undertake a visit, we won't be able to facilitate that until the lockdown rules are changed.
Thanks very much, David. I wouldn't want that to prevent members from wanting a site visit if that's what they need. It would simply be a case of as and when rather than in the immediate future. So thanks for that, David. On any other matters in relation to that, if you can just maybe catch up with David online, I'm sure he'll resolve any individual questions or issues you might have. So apart from that minute of the previous meeting, this is a true record and members content to approve that.
Indeed. Can I come in, Chair? John,
John,
just a minor point. On page 11, the list of members excludes Councillor Thompson and myself.
Okay, Tracy, can you deal with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, John. Other than that, are we content to approve? Thank you, members. Okay, we come to the statement for this morning. Tracy, can you read out the procedure for today, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and applicants or their agents. In line with the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020 Schedule 6, Part 4, covering the exclusion of the public from meetings of local authorities, representatives were offered the option of joining the meeting remotely to deliver their presentation or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments by which their very nature are more complex, and the time limit will be 5 minutes. The chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members may address the committee. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Thank you. Okay, members, move on to agenda item number 4. An application for the siting of 6 holiday chalets, alterations to existing access, formation of access road and installation of shared septic tank and soakaway at land adjacent to WIGTOWN House Hotel, 19 Bank Street, WIGTOWN. The application type is full application, reference number 20/1127/full. The recommendation is to refuse, and the case officer is Iona Brooke, although David Sutty is going to take us through the presentation today. So David, if you'd like to take us through the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. One minor correction. If members look on page 30, paragraph 421, the 6th line unfortunately says benefactor. That should say beneficiary. So if we can have the first slide, please. Thank you. That shows the location plan and shows the application site. I should also apologise that the copy of the location plan in your agenda papers is not up to normal standard we would look for. That was simply because our mapping system was actually down on the day that we had to produce maps. So it's just a screen grab of what you see on the slide there. So the site is at the eastern edge of the town, and as you can see, it's also to the south of where the main road comes into the east, the C15. So on the next slide, you'll see that that's the layout plan where you have 6 cabins and an access road coming in. I'd also draw members' attention to the contour lines, which I think are quite relevant. It shows the fall across the site, which is down towards the southeast. It's actually relatively steep across the site. And the next slide shows you the actual units which are proposed. It's probably worth pointing out as well in paragraph 4.16, which you will find on page 29 of your agenda. There's a comment that the cabins are limited to 2 people. It is, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, it is just a 1-bedroom unit in each case, but they are showing a double bed and a single bed, so I suppose you could actually get 3 people in the unit, but I think that is most likely to be a child, so therefore the comment about it being very unlikely that you'd have more than 2 cars per cabin really remains. The next plan is an isometric view, which just shows the view across the site and how the cabins would actually be sited. You've also got the listed wall there at the left-hand side on the western boundary. And the next slide shows an artist impression of how it would look. That's looking in a northwesterly direction from the bottom of the site. It also shows how a sort of fairly light impact of the units would be used by stilts for each of the properties. And the next slide moves on to some photos. This is looking west into the centre of WIGTOWN. And excuse me, just on the left-hand side of the slide there, you have got a listed building, which is category B. For the avoidance of doubt, it's sometimes referred to as Bank House in the report. That's because that's the name that was used in the actual listing for it. So it's category B, Bank House, but it's more recently been used and known as the WIGTOWN House Hotel. So turning round 180 degrees from that view, you've got the view along the C15 public road, and you can see how that looks down across the site and how the land drops quite significantly. You've got the War Memorial there on the left-hand side, and also the parish church. And the next slide turns around 90 degrees from that, and you can see that that's the view right across the site. And basically looking down there towards the WIGTOWN Bay Local Nature Reserve, which is part of the the regional scenic area down to the coast. Next slide is just a little closer view in of that, looking across the site, and again you can see the listed wall of Bank House, or the WIGTOWN House Hotel, on the right hand side there, and you can see the way that the land falls down towards the coast. Next slide shows a view from the other side of that, where you're the bottom of the application site, and you're looking north. So you've got the WIGTOWN House Hotel on your left hand side there, and the parish church at the top of the hill along with the War Memorial. And again you can see the slope across the site as you look down. And then you've got a view next which is looking in a westerly direction towards WIGTOWN House Hotel from the edge of the eastern side of the application site. And the final slide is a view just from the War Memorial, again looking out over the coast, which I think it does make quite clearly that there's a very abrupt boundary between the built-up urban historic part of WIGTOWN and where there is this boundary here. It is agricultural land, which is 3.2 in terms of its soil quality, which is one of the reasons you'll note in the recommendation for refusal. But the principal reason is really to do with the concerns about the conservation area, the listed buildings nearby, the effect on the landscape setting of the regional scenic area, and concerns that it's not been satisfactorily demonstrated as yet that it wouldn't have an adverse effect on archaeology. So you could really summarise this one as being it's the right development but in the wrong place. It's the type of development we would like to support, but I'm afraid this location here is deemed to be too sensitive for this nature of development. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, David. Members, any questions for David as the reporting case officer? Jim McComb.
Thank you, Chair. David, on page 20, the top of page 20, it talks about a new native hedgerow would be planted. This is along the southern boundary of the site. But at the bottom of page 24, report from the council archaeologist refers to a proposed tree belt on the southern boundary of the development. Could I have clarification? Is it a hedgerow or is it a belt of trees?
David.
Thank you, Chair. Laura, if you could take it back to the isometric view of the site, please. My reading of this is it's maybe just the terminology used by the archaeologist. That shows a hedge along the southern boundary rather than a full-blown tree belt. But obviously, if members were minded to support the application, it would be open to yourselves to make a requirement for some more substantial planting than is shown on that isometric view.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, David. Any other members with questions for the case officer? In that case, we'll go to the first of the speakers. Today we have First on the list is Arthur Scott as an objector, and Tracy has the representation to read out to members. So, Tracy, when you're ready, can you read out that representation, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So this is from Arthur Scott. It is clear from the Planning Officer's report that this is a development with a significant downside, one with costs and disbenefits that would be borne by local residents and the community of WIGTOWN as a whole. At the same time, the benefits will largely accrue to the private interests of the developer alone. The proposed development also carries with it a high level of risk. There is no provision in the application for an on-site presence from the developer, and as two of them are located 2.5 miles distant from the project, while the other is based in Dumfries, it will be impossible for the developer to ensure that the project is adequately managed in such a way to prevent potential damage and disturbance to an extremely sensitive site. Given the risk and importance of the site to the community of WIGTOWN and beyond, it would be in everyone's interest, including those of the developers themselves, if this application were turned down. I would also like to draw attention to the specific issue of the wall bounding the proposed development within WIGTOWN House Hotel, which is in a fragile state. This winter has seen it deteriorate further, resulting in a number of large stones up to approximately 15 kilograms in weight falling from the wall, with evidence that further such damage could easily occur at any moment. I doubt that the developer is aware of this issue, but in the event of the application being approved, it should only be done so on the provision that the wall is made safe to protect anyone working on the site and later to protect anyone occupying the holiday chalets, which would lie only a few metres from this wall. That's the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, the first registered speaker today then is Sandra McDowell from WIGTOWN Community Council. Sandra, are you with us today?
Yes, I am.
Nice to see you, Sandra. I'm sure you'll know the process. You have 3 minutes to make your representation. I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. If you'd be kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you, I'd be grateful. And just whenever you're ready, Sandra, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. The Royal Borough of WIGTOWN and District Community Council is grateful to the committee for the opportunity to comment on this proposal at your meeting. In our opinion, the Planning Officer's report by Iona Brooke provides an excellent representation of the application and its context. Our community's view put forward by the Community Council is clearly against the proposal, due primarily to its seriously detrimental impact on the natural and built heritage of the former Royal Borough and its setting within the regional scenic area, including the local nature reserve. We will not reiterate these or other details as they are all in your papers. However, we do wish to comment on the economic impact issue. Much could be made of the economic benefit of the proposed development, but this is theoretical, not meaningfully evidenced by the applicant and likely to be limited. Any such putative economic benefit must obviously be set against the proposal's economic disadvantages. Our community's opinion, supported by the local authority's archaeologist, is that the proposal will have a substantial negative impact on the setting of listed buildings, scheduled monuments, and the WIGTOWN conservation area in which the application site lies, and a substantial negative impact on the natural environment and its appreciation to the east of WIGTOWN, which local planning policy seeks to protect. The proposed rubbish and recycling area brings additional risk of negative environmental impact in a sensitive area, especially when not actively managed on or near the site. All this negative impact on the natural and built heritage risks causing a significant negative impact on the tourist experience, which in turn risks a negative economic impact, undermining any positive impact. WIGTOWN Community Council submitted an objection to this application based on community opinion evidenced by a public Zoom meeting and numerous submissions to us, as well as our own consideration of the proposal and relevant policy. We remain unanimously opposed to the application, and we call on the Planning Applications Committee to refuse the proposal as recommended. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Sandra, and thanks for being so succinct. Any members have any questions for Sandra? Appear not, Sandra. This is your lucky day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for being with us, Sandra. We move on to the next speaker, who is the applicant, Mr. Ian McCrae. Ian, are you with us?
Yes.
Good morning, Ian. The same circumstances apply to you. You will have 3 minutes to make your presentation to the committee. I will ask you with 30 seconds to go to bring your presentation to a conclusion, and you'll be kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you. I'd be grateful. And just whenever you're ready, Ian. Thank you.
The proposed development sits on a field known as Blacksfield, named after a previous owner, which my grandfather purchased about 70 years ago with the intention of developing it. There were numerous building plots sold off of the field up to 1989, which coincided with the closing of Bladna Creamery and a general downturn in the local economy, which has been turned round by the designation of WIGTOWN as Scotland's Booktown. Also, the field was included in a previous version of the local development plan, so there is recent planning history for possible development on the site. The proposed development is in front of you to try to meet for holiday accommodation in the area, which the council would appear to want to encourage, and is evident from their financial report of the conversion of the Bank of Scotland building to a bunkhouse. WIGTOWN is one of the few towns in D&G that does not have any caravan or campsites, and so therefore loses out on the financial benefits these facilities offering short-term accommodation brings to the shops and businesses within the town. The development seeks to address that situation and offer further choice in the self-catering provision, which is very popular among tourists wishing to visit the area. Much has been made of the archaeological sensitivity of the site, and this is something we took steps to address right from the start of the process by engaging with the council's archaeologist and attending the scheme accordingly before proceeding with the submission of the application. We have always been willing to engage an archaeologist to oversee any groundworks undertaken, which due to the design of the development would be as minimal as possible, and are happy to accept any condition to that effect if permission is granted. The development is a means of diversifying the farm business and therefore meets an important criteria of council policy and will not result in losing much land from agricultural use. Having farmed this area my whole life, I can assure you that such a small field lying within a town's boundaries that is steeply sloping is not that productive, and certainly not the material loss to agriculture as portrayed in the committee report. The informal layout and the small design of the pods are such that they comply with policy criteria, and combined with the slope and topography of the field means they will be as unobtrusive as it's possible to make them, therefore leaving and maintaining the undisturbed views of Wigtown Bay over the site. Our aim with this project is to enhance the area and indeed boost the local economy, and we believe this development achieves that. We plan to use local contractors, sourcing materials in the region as much as possible. We've already been approached by several companies promising their services, so we know that these works will benefit the local economy by keeping the investment here. The aim long term is to bring more people and money to the area that will sustain existing and create more jobs, and to develop a sustainable and viable business with a local emphasis and ethos. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks for your presentation. Very kind of you. Members have any questions for Ian on his statement today or on the application he submitted? Looks like you two, Ian, have had a free run. Thank you very much for joining us today, and
Thank
thanks
you.
for the presentation. Members are now in session. Ivor Hislop.
Chair, I think the points that David Sutty made, it is a good idea, but it's in the wrong place because of the historical environment. So I'd be quite happy to support the comments David has made earlier and the comments within the report.
Thanks, Ivor. So that's you proposing that we go with the officer's recommendation.
Yes.
And, thanks, Ivor. Andrew Juste.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding one of the recommendations, and that is recommendation 4, that talks about the quality of the soil in this land. But if this land is in the centre of WIGTOWN, it's within the town boundary, why do we have the quality of the soil in front of us as our recommendation to refuse? I thought it was curious.
Well, we're in session. I'll ask David Sutty to answer that. David.
Thanks, Chair. Basically, the current authorised use of the land is as agriculture, and the proposal therefore does require the removal of that agricultural land. So it is, if you have a ranking of the reasons for refusal, that one was put in forth for a reason. It's not the overriding reason, but it is nonetheless a reason because it is currently an agricultural unit.
Thanks, David. And I suppose, in layman's terms, if you need an assessment, then it has to be included in the report, which is why it's there, Andrew. So we have a proposal from Ivor Hislop. Are there any alternative views, or is this a unanimous decision of the committee?
Agreed.
Thank you. It seems to be a unanimous decision of the committee. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of the committee today, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Members have agreed to refuse the application on the grounds as detailed in the report.
And a number of folk have now listed their support for that. Thank you. That's my manager bringing me a cup of coffee. Sorry about that. Can we move to agenda item number 5. This is an application for the formation of road access, including erection of bridge and associated works at site adjacent to Silverdene, BALLPLAY Road, MOFFAT. The application type is full application. The reference number is 20/0840/full. The recommendation is to approve subject to conditions, and the case officer is Andrew Robinson. Andrew's with us. And before we go to the business on the agenda, we also have Kevin Morrison and Ken Root from Roads with us. And this will be Ken's last committee. He has taken retirement for the service. He leaves in a few weeks' time. And I'm sure members all want to join me in wishing Ken well in his retirement and whatever he chooses to do. So we have Andrew with us. Andrew Robinson, are you with us?
Yes, Chair.
Good. Can you take us through your presentation, please?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just moving on to the next slide. The application site is located on the eastern side of Well Road within MOFFAT, and this slide shows the location of the site within the wider context of MOFFAT. It's located towards the northern end of Well Road, and the site itself forms a smaller part of a larger area of land falling within the applicant's ownership. So moving on to the next slide, this is the location of the site within its sort of more local context. So I'll just point out some adjoining key features. So the Burnock Water runs through the site, which is shown in blue on the slide there. To the north of the site, which is actually shown in black on this slide, is a neighbouring property entitled Red Acres, where the property is bounded by a private road called Alton Road. To the south of the site is Haywood Road, and then further south is BALLPLAY Road. So moving on to the next slide. This is a site plan of the proposed access road. So it's effectively a T-junction arrangement consisting of a footway on the south side of the road, and then would go into the adjoining field to the east. So if we move on to the next slide, I've actually included a sort of zoomed in version just to make it easier to see the access arrangement with Well Road. So footway on the southern side. On the northern side would require some tree felling just to get the levels, because the access road will require to be raised because of the land level differences, which I'll show you in the photographs in due course. There's drainage provision on the northern side of the site. At the access with Well Road, there is a crossing proposed to connect to the footway on the western side of Well Road, and visibility is shown on this slide as 2.4 by 43 metres to the south and 2 by 43 metres to the north. So moving on to the next slide, this just shows the arrangement. So it's a pretty standard T-junction, and you can see the footway crossing over the over Well Road, and its location there is shown just to the south of the access. So moving on to the next slide, there's requires to be a bridge over the Burnett Water to serve as part of the road. So this shows the plan where the bridge would be and the extent of the bridge, and above cross sections showing the bridge. And if we move on to the next slide, is the elevation. So the substructure, if you like, of the bridge is reinforced concrete or precast concrete, and the bridge itself would consist of windstone parapet walls on either side of the road. So moving on to the next slide, the application's been accompanied by swept path drawings, showing that a bus can manoeuvre out and into the site. And if you move on to the next slide, it also shows that a refuse vehicle can manoeuvre into and out of the site. So moving on to the next slide, I mentioned that there would be an extensive tree felling required to facilitate this development, which is shown on this slide. So a number of trees along the northern boundary and some on the western boundary need to be felled, although there will be some to be retained on the northern boundary. And moving on to the next slide, we're moving on to the photographs now. So this is taken, this is looking up now, up Well Road. It's actually taken near the junction with BALLPLAY Road. So the access is located a little bit further up the road, actually beyond where the blue car is parked. But this gives you an idea of the approach to the application site from the south. Moving on to the next slide is with the junction with Hayward Road. So the access would be situated roughly 25 metres to the north of the telegraph pole. Moving on to the next slide, this is looking south from the point of the proposed access. So there will be required to be some road widening here to make a 6 metre width of the road, but that would be able to be accommodated within the grass verge, so within the public road boundary. Moving on to the next slide, this is looking south on Well Road, so you can, with the junction with BALLPLAY Road. And moving on to the next slide, this shows the BALLPLAY Road junction, and in particular the bridge, which is a single span access bridge over the water. Moving on to the next slide, this is within the application site. This is on a position which used to have a dwelling house. The access road would be situated towards the northern boundary. Moving on to the next slide, this is looking west along the route of the access road, effectively towards Well Road. And if we move on to the next slide, you can see the extent of level change between the application site, which is situated lower than Well Road. And this is the location where the bridge would be situated. And moving on to the next slide, this is looking along the route of the access going east. And you can see that there's a field access, which is where the access road would go into. And moving on to the next slide, and the access road would then go into the adjoining field, of which it would then thereafter serve an allocated housing site. So moving on to the next slide. In conclusion, the proposal would facilitate access into an allocated housing site, and following consultations with consultees, key issues in respect of flood risk and road safety are considered to have been addressed throughout the course of the application, and the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions stated in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Members, any questions for the case officer? David McKee.
Thanks, Chair. I'm kind of concerned about this. You showed a bridge there. Is it amendments to that existing bridge, or is it a completely new bridge? And what's the loading on that bridge? You know, heavy vehicles going over it and that type of thing. And he mentioned that the site that the bridge is going into has been approved for house building. Should that application not be tied into the bridge, or is that something totally you're quite happy to leave as totally separate?
Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In respect of the first question, it's a brand new bridge. The photograph of the bridge over BALLPLAY Road is an existing bridge, which would be retained in its current state, but the proposed bridge is situated about 100 metres to the north of that. But I've included a photograph of that just to show the context of the site. So it is a new bridge that is to be constructed. I couldn't answer the question on the loading. I'd probably have to ask our roads officers for what the loading is on the existing bridge, but the new bridge will obviously be constructed to modern standards, and it's my understanding that the bridge is already approved, has got consent from the engineering team. In respect of the second point, the second query, could you just remind me what that was again? Sorry.
It was to see why it wasn't tied into the application for the development itself.
Yes, as stated in paragraph, I think it's 1.6 of the report. I'll just check. No, it's 1.7. The wider residential development in the adjoining field doesn't have any planning permission submitted for that yet. We do have a planning application proposing the erection of a dwelling house within the location of where there was an existing house, but that application is currently on hold until the outcome of this application. So effectively we're wanting to make sure what the decision is on this application first before we would actually determine that application, but it can be determined as a separate application. We're happy for that to occur.
I thought the report said somewhere, Andrew, that the rest of the application might have been determined by delegated authority, which is why it's not there. But anyway, your response is fine, absolutely fine.
Right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe. I'll just bring the road staff in. I can imagine that they would never approve the road bridge if it wasn't able to carry heavy traffic. But anyway, do we have either a roads team here, either we've lost the place now, Ken, or our replacement officer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the bridge itself is subject to an approval in principle, and our construction engineers in the structures team will make sure that that's constructed to the appropriate standard.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Next speaker, Stephen Thompson. Stephen, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was actually a question relating to the other application for the dwelling house, Silverdene. I think it's paragraph 1.7 on page 38 in the report, because looking at both the sites, I'm just curious as to why one would wait for the other to be determined, because they both seem to suggest that they have permission to develop on the same bit of land. So it's really just to get a wee bit more detail on how the two applications could concern the same piece of land, assuming that both would have permission from the landowner to develop there. So could you explain that a little bit more, please, if the case officer could do that?
No bother, Stephen. Andrew?
Yes, Chair. The red line boundary for the bridge is situated in the northern part of the wider site allocation. The individual house itself is actually situated to the south of the proposed access road. So the two could be constructed separately, but obviously the key factor is the position of the access road and whether that is to be accepted before we could be in a position to determine the application for the individual dwelling house. So, and also its position. So as the report says, no determination has been made on that application yet. It's not being they've been submitted as separate planning applications, which the applicant is entitled to do because the red line boundaries are actually different. But in terms of the blue line, which shows the applicant's holding, it's all within the same applicant's ownership. But the bridge infrastructure would have to come first.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Any other members, questions for the case officer at this moment in time? Okay, then we'll go to registered speakers. We have one. We have Brian Walker from Hartfell Homes. The applicant, Brian, are you with us?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can indeed. Brian, you'll have the same, good to see you now. You'll have the same 3 minutes to make a presentation. I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go to drive presentation to a conclusion. And if you've been kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you, I'd be grateful. So just whenever you're ready, Brian, thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors and officers. I am Brian Walker, the applicant from Hartfell Homes here in Moffat. The proposed bridge is the key to unlock a site for residential housing which was identified in both LDP1 and LDP2. This site was subject to an overall master plan which was a requirement for the council, and that master plan ran to over 100 pages of in-depth studies from roads to archaeology and was approved by the council in 2020. Bridge, as proposed, is part of that plan. Well Road is the major road in this area, and great consideration and planning was given to the best position for this new bridge to serve the site from Well Road. The traffic impact studies in 2009 and 2018 reported that Well Road was more than capable of serving this development. And just to answer, there was a question a second ago about the separate house and the actual road and the bridge. Silverdene itself extends to more than an acre and is more than capable of actually accommodating both of these facilities. The proposed access point is practical as well as minimising the disturbance to existing properties by the formation of a screened avenue into the new development. Hartfell Homes have a growing list of people waiting to relocate or come back to Moffat. In fact, more than we have houses planned for initially, ranging from first-time buyers, young families to retired couples, all wishing to enjoy the benefits that Moffat has to offer. We feel the report written by your officer, Andrew Robinson, is both fair and accurate in dealing with all of the issues raised both for and against this proposal, and we thank him for that work. I would like to conclude by asking you to endorse his views and allow this enabling work to take place for all of those families seeking a new home in Moffat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for being so concise. Members, do you have any questions for the applicant? Jim McComb.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed bridge is at a section of the Burn where there are a number of meanders. Do you have any concern about river erosion and possible movement of any of these meanders?
Well, having been brought up farming with water and rivers do tend to move an awful lot, but the actual bedrock in the Burnet water is quite hard and secure rock, and you can see the formation of that rock at either side of the actual indentation of where the water flows. So I would doubt very much whether the water at that particular point would alter its course because of that bedrock that seems to be quite permanently there. It's visible to see, and obviously the formation of the two structures that we would, the pillars rather, that we would put either side would be into that bedrock, leaving the actual channel hopefully undisturbed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, thanks, Brian, for being present today, and thanks for your presentation. Members, we're in session. Archie Dryborough.
Thanks very much, Chair. Having read the report and looking at the recommendations, I would agree with that, and I would go with the recommendations on this one, Chair.
Thanks very much, Archie. Any alternative views to that?
No.
If not, then in that case, it's a unanimous decision of this committee. Tracy, will you confirm the decision of the committee, please?
Yes, Chairman. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions as detailed in the report.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And again, thanks to Kevin for being with us, and good luck in your retirement, Ken. We move on to agenda item number 6, an application for the erection of fence to form a storage compound at Port William Harbour, Port William. The application type is listed building consent. The reference number is 20/1699/LBC. The recommendation is to approve unconditionally, and the case officer is Tracy Carnegie, although once again David Sutty is taking us through this particular report. David, are you with us again, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The reason that this one is before you is purely because the applicant is the council, and it's an application purely for listed building consent. Planning permission is not required because it falls within the council's permitted development rights. So if we look at the first slide, that shows you the context, where it is a category C listed pier, the quayside in Port William. You're immediately adjacent to what's called the PERSAC building, which is the Port William Inshore Rescue Service. It's also got a cafe in it called The View, so that's immediately to the east of the application site. And otherwise, probably the next plan shows its context a little better. And that shows the overall context in terms of the whole quayside area. So there are no other buildings along the quayside, and the proposal is basically to form a compound on that area. The land to the south rises up where there's a car park, and again the photos will show that shortly. So the next slide just shows the context of it, where it's a compound that would be formed just along from the PERSAC building. And at the moment, it's just an area which has got a amount of things like lobster pots, and there's a couple of container units there, so it's effectively to tidy that up. And the next slide shows you the elevations of the fence, which would be a 2-metre high fence. And it's the reason I say it requires this building consent is that the entire pier quayside area is listed, so it's purely really the effect of bolting that fence into the listed structure that means it's requiring listed building consent. But as you can see, it's immediately adjacent to an existing building. It's probably about the only location on the quayside which would be acceptable. 2-metre high vertical fence, which would be matte black in colour. The next slide starts the photos, and that's sort of a view across the harbour, so you can see the PERSAC building, and it's a live operational harbour. It's in active use. And the next slide gives you a little bit more of a close-up view just at the edge of the PERSAC building, and then you can see the area there where there's the 2 containers and the area of lobster pots, which would be effectively enclosed by this fence. So the next photo along shows just the view looking back the other way. So you can see there's already quite an amount of lobster pots and the like stacked up there. And the final slide is just a view across the harbour from the elevated land. So it's going to have a minimal impact to that south side because there is already a retaining wall in that location, so that it's, the drop down is a metre or so down into the side. So overall, as I say, it's really before you simply because it's a council application, but its effect on the setting and the character of the listed building, listed structure, are considered to be acceptable, so it's recommended for unconditional approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. Questions for Case Officer, Councillor McKee?
Thanks, Chair. It's just the amount of baskets that was lying about there. Is the proposal big enough to house all those baskets, David?
David?
Thank you, Chair. I would assume that they've done their working out on this. Again, the planning side of things is not something that can actually be considered by the committee. It's only the effect on the listed building of the quayside that we can consider.
Thanks for that, Joe. Any other questions for the Case Officer? In that case, members, we're in session. Archie?
Agree with the recommendations, Chair.
Thanks, Archie. Any alternative view, members? In that case, can you confirm the unanimous decision of the committee, please, Tracy?
Yes, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application unconditionally.
Thank you, Tracy. Move on to agenda item 7, which is the outcome of a public inquiry decision for information and noting only. Members content to note the outcome of that public inquiry. Found in favour of the council's decision. David City, did you want to say something? Yeah, okay.
Not in particular, Chair, no, just for noting.
Thank you. So, members, that's for noting.
Agreed.
And that concludes business. Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Henry, for seconding the previous agenda item. Okay, a number of members happy to note that. So that then concludes the business for today. Thanks to members and officers for being present and those that made presentations. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks.